miteinander. So, I want to tell you a little story today, some of my thoughts about life and the universe, and touching on the topics, what is life and why we should care, and what we can do about it to change the world. And two of the books I've written, Elefanthen im Au is a story of the history and future of the universe, and Da Draußen is the story of the origin of life on Earth and what life could be like out there amongst the stars. And in writing these books, I always try and put in some of my own personal, say, philosophy about life and why we should care about life, but from a scientific perspective. So, what is life? There's life all around us, but can you actually define what life is? It's very tricky. There's no real definition of what life is. But all life shares a set of common characteristics. All life is based on the cell. All life uses the same genetic code for storing information. All life uses the same amino acids that the genetic code puts together to make proteins. And those amino acids are all of the same right-handed type. And the list goes on. All life shares 100 common genes, such as the gene for making ATP, which stores energy. And all of this, when you put it together, is the evidence that all life on Earth is related to a common ancestor. And this is it. This is our great-great-great-grandmother of every living thing. It's just a single-celled, simple, bacteria-like object. And from that, through evolution, through mutations, through natural selection, I think pretty much all biologists agree that this gives rise to all the abundance of life around us today, up to the most magnificent creatures with the largest brains on the planet, which is the elephant. Whilst we don't know yet how life began, it's not a far step of the imagination to see how a random collection of atoms and molecules can just do what molecules do, stick together to form a replicating creature, a cell. And that's my definition of life. It's a molecular, self-organized, replicating machine, just doing what it does because that's what molecules do. Simple as that. It arose spontaneously and then evolved to give rise to all the life around us. So, this first organism that spontaneously appeared on Earth, it was just a molecular machine optimized for passing on its genetic code. It had no purpose. Our ancestors were microbes. They could sense the world with chemical senses, but they had no neural network or a memory process like we have today. So there was no reason for molecules to exist. There was no purpose for life in the beginning. Just was there to do what it did because that's what molecules do. Life began with no purpose whatsoever. So, how to put this in perspective of the universe? So now I want to just sort of put life on Earth in the perspective of what we know about the universe today, how it evolved, and also moving on to the future of the universe. And to do that, I'll just make a very simple representation that probably many of you have seen before, but I will just put the entire universe into a single 24-hour day. So we'll compress the entire 13.8 billion years of our universe into one day, such that each hour that passes is 570 million years, and each minute is 10 million years. So on midnight, zero, time, space, matter appear. And we don't know how, we don't know why. It's the biggest unsolved problem in physics and cosmology today. Not much happened. The universe was pretty dark for 20 minutes until the first stars collapsed and lit up the universe. And the first planets also formed at this time. There are stars with planets that we've found in our universe that date back to 13 billion years ago. It's not until 9 o'clock in the morning that half of the stars in our own galaxy have assembled. And more stars are forming throughout the day. Our sun and solar system don't actually appear until just before tea time at 4 p.m. in this 24-hour day. It took about 10 minutes on this time scale for the surface of the Earth to cool and oceans and atmosphere to form, and another hour before life has assembled itself. That first replicating molecule emerges like a phoenix from the ashes, from stardust, from literally the ashes of dead stars that have come back together to form the planets, to form our Earth. 5:30 on this day. That single-celled life, the complex multicellular life, eukaryotes, they don't appear until 8 p.m. on this time scale. Took another 3 hours before the Cambrian explosion. And brains appeared, brains to make sense of our senses, as a survival tool for seeing the world, for interpreting and storing memories. About 10 minutes later, the first land plants appeared. Another 10 minutes after that, at about 11:30, amphibian creatures crawled out from the oceans and started to live on the land, which were beginning to be covered by plants. 35 minutes past 11 p.m, dinosaurs are there. They take their place at the top of the food chain. 20 minutes later, at 5 minutes to midnight, a giant asteroid, another one, hits our Earth and wipes out 90% of all species. No more dinosaurs, but that gave way to a whole new set of species, including elephants and humans, and without that, we wouldn't be here even. 20 seconds to midnight, our ancestors diverged from orangutans and apes. Homo sapiens, that's our little species, we began our journey out of Africa at 1 second until the end of the day. 300ths of a second to the end of the day, we constructed the pyramids and Stonehenge. 1,000th of a second to the end of the day, Albert Einstein was born, and then we reach today in our room, gathered here to hear this little story. And the question is, of course, will we be here for 1 second after midnight on this time scale? Chances are no, because most mammalian species don't live that long. But and the way we're messing up our planet, it makes me a bit pessimistic at times. I'll try and give an optimistic view today. And well, I'll start off with a bit more of a pessimistic view, because unfortunately our planet is not going to survive forever. Our sun, a star, it's an evolving source of energy. It's burning through its fuel. It's getting hotter at the center. At about 3 p.m. on this time scale, the sun has evolved so much that the temperature on the surface of the Earth is so high there are no oceans or atmosphere left. So by 3 o'clock in the morning, we're going to have to escape our planet and get out of here. And about at the end of tomorrow on this time scale, this is a clock, well, you can't see it from the back, but it shows the calculation of the luminosity of our sun, where we are now, and where it ends its life tomorrow on this time scale. But that's 7 billion years in real time scale, so we shouldn't worry too much about it. Unfortunately, as we look out into the universe, it's a bit grim, the long-term picture, because all stars will eventually burn out. Eventually the universe will become dark. The vacuum energy will take away all of the galaxies out of view, and we're really left with a cold, dark universe. And my colleagues debate whether or not life can exist past that point. So from cosmology, we've sort of learned that life, that the conditions for life became quite perfect, not so long after the Big Bang. And in the far future, the conditions will become extremely harsh for life again. But I wouldn't worry too much, because the universe is just amazing, it's beautiful, and that time in the future is 10 trillion years from now. On this time scale. 10 trillion years we have to exist as a species, to travel to the stars, to visit all of those worlds out there. That's one of the most amazing findings from astronomy, from our species even, that when we look at the night sky, every star we look at has its own worlds orbiting it. Over 10 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone. So, what better purpose for life than to explore space, to go out there and see what's out there amongst the stars. And there's no reason we can't do that. So, really, what I've learned from cosmology is the universe is bloody amazing, and we should just be striving to appreciate that beauty. And life is amazing within this universe. All of the things that came together to create that conscious living being that appeared in the Cambrian explosion. It's just amazing. And that is sort of my take on the purpose of life. Life has the purpose you give it, and it's amazing to be alive, and it's also amazing to let other creatures enjoy that world. Why would you want to end the life of another conscious living thing? So I only live my life by one single rule, and that is not to harm another neural network, another conscious being. The neural network is the most complicated thing in our universe. It's far more complicated than a star, far more complicated than black holes. We don't know exactly how they work, but it's an amazing construction that stores our memories, our thoughts, our hopes, our love, and this is what is special to me, a neural network. And that's what I would strive to protect. So, as life evolved from this single cell, it had no purpose then. It didn't suddenly didn't evolve a purpose. Life still doesn't follow any rules. The only rules that life follows are the rules of physics, the laws of nature. That's the one rule that life actually has to follow. The purpose of life and the rules that we make up for it are what we make up for the benefit of our species, or in fact our tribes, is what we really care about. Most people don't really care about the species as a whole, unfortunately. So what about these laws of physics that life must obey? Well, there's a nice example of that I was thinking about. And this is Soylent Green. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a great movie from 1970 with Charlton Heston. And people need it in the year 2022, and that's coming close. What is it? It's in the future when food is running out and people are turned into green biscuits to feed other people. That's the Soylent Green. So we're going to need that soon. But does that work out? Is this a solution? Can we just feed humans to other humans? Well, we can work it out. The inefficiency of eating animals is a simple calculation. I just wrote it down here for you. Animals eat about 2% of their weight a day to provide the calories for their movement and thoughts. An animal is about 60% edible, so one adult human can feed another human for 30 days. Okay, so the time to fatten up a human so it's ready to be consumed, it's about 5 years if you overfeed it and keep it in a little pen. And assuming a linear growth rate, to fatten up that human requires 30 other humans. So that is the inefficiency of eating animals, right there. Very simple calculation. And the bottom line of that is using Soylent Green as a food, the entire population of humans would be reduced to 0 people in 4 generations. So that isn't a solution. You can also look at this in terms of another physical property, just energy, our metabolic rate, what we burn through. We require 1 watt per kilogram. So a tree or an elephant, they get their calories in different ways. Trees just stand there and getting sunlight, whereas the elephant might eat the tree. So what's the calculation there? It's quite simple. For a human, we need 2 square meters of sunlight. Now, if that's an evolutionary advantage that for some reason didn't appear on our planet, how great it would be just to absorb the sunlight on our bodies to gather energy. But we don't, actually. We have to get our food in other ways. Since photosynthesis is about 5% efficient, then we need about 20 square meters of land to grow food to fuel our own energy requirements. That's simple physics. But to feed animals, to feed humans, you need 30 times that. That's the factor of 30. Why? Why is this so inefficient? It's because plants don't move around and think. That is the bottom line for the reason that it is wasteful to use animals as food, because they spend most of their energy moving around and thinking. So conclusion 2, the inefficiency of eating animals, again, is a factor of 30. You can divide that by the calorie content of animals over plants. You might get a factor of 2 there. And you can also get another factor of 2 by intensive, nasty farming and giving animals drugs. That gets you down to a factor of 7, and that's what's quoted often in the news or in publications. So that's the calculation anyway. So how to change the world to make people see this fact, to make our species not just care about the tribe, but to care about the species? Well, I think the message is coming out. Just the Guardian headlines last week: avoiding meat and dairy is the single biggest way to reduce your impact on Earth. And they quote the same figures here in terms of the waste in eating animals compared to plants. So, where am I going with this? How are we going to change the world? Well, I've been a vegetarian since birth. I've never actually tasted an animal, so I don't know what it tastes like even. But it probably tastes quite good because people seem to enjoy it. But again, my philosophy is that I think it's amazing to be alive. I don't want to take that experience away from any other neural network. So I just try and set an example of how to live my life with the care of animals in mind. And it's always frustrated me, as I'm sure it has you, that I'm surrounded by so-called smart, intelligent professors at the university, and I ask them, why are you eating this dead stuff when you know it's harmful? It's terrible for the environment, it's terrible for the animals, and they just look sort of shy and say, well, I like the taste of meat. That's strange to me. But I think the real reason that people continue that, knowing it's wrong, is that people do not like to be in the minority. How to change that? We want to get to the point where today we walk into a restaurant, if somebody was smoking at the table, we would all go, oh my God, that's disgusting. And we want the same thing when somebody has ordered a steak. We want everyone in that restaurant to go, oh my God, that's disgusting. And how to get there, and the arguments for why this is important, I can't make that as eloquently as Peter Singer or Philip Boland. Everything that needs to be said has been said on this topic. It's like the debate between science and religion, which I've taken part in, but now I refuse to, because everything that needs to be said on that topic has been said. Debates of logical argument do not change the minds of the majority. So what does? What changes the minds from a minority to a majority? Well, there's some insights into that. We've seen recently Me Too. It was triggered by an event that led to a tipping point. The behavior of certain individuals was known to be shocking, but not enough people knew or cared about it until a tipping point was reached in Hollywood with Mr. Weinstein. So how do you get to that tipping point? Well, the tipping point is when a minority becomes the majority. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I'd read this paper on social conscience through the influence of committed minorities. It was a study of when you get to that tipping point. A very interesting paper, which I thought didn't really make too much, I didn't see it really happening, but the conclusions of these authors through intensive numerical studies and analytic studies was when the number of committed opinion holders reaches, well, when it's below 10%, there's no visible progress in the spread of ideas. It would literally take the amount of time comparable to the age of the universe for the group to reach the majority. But once those convinced belief holders reach 10%, the idea spreads like a flame. That's an interesting point, and I just, last week preparing for this presentation, I was interested, does this really apply? Let me just look at the statistics on the old atheist religion argument, and I went to some statistics from the United Kingdom on the rise of atheism, going back to 1950, when about 2% of the population was atheist. In the 1980s. It sort of went up close to 10%, and it just tipped over 10%, and now more than half of the UK is atheists, which, excuse me if you're not an atheist, but that is the sensible sort of side of the argument to actually live on. You know, one side is just believing what you're told, the other side is actually thinking about what to think about. So that was fascinating to me. This 10% rule really seems to, you know, have some sense to it. And in the 1960s, vegetarians, you know, we were, my parents were, I guess, amongst the first vegetarians in the United Kingdom, much less than 1% of the population. And now that number is close to 10% in the United Kingdom. In the USA and China, it's 3 or 4%. So it's very close to the tipping point. So how can we change the world and get to a tipping point when we see a phase transition in our ideas and beliefs? Well, I'm not sure there's a magic answer to this, but as I sort of mentioned, lecturing people on what to think doesn't work, but you have to educate people on how to think. And I think the most important thing that I've learned that I can do is simply to invite non-vegetarians for dinner and cook them some amazing food. And don't even tell them it's vegetarian. They will ask at some point. And just try and be a role model. Be there as a person who is not some crazy outlandish hippie, but someone that can be respected and gives people the confidence to do what they actually want to do in the first place. That, to me, is the most successful thing I have done in persuading other people to care about animals. So my history in food goes back a little bit. I spent my childhood working for my sister, who they opened actually the first vegetarian hotel in England, this beautiful place in the Lake District, which they just retired this last year, actually. So, completely vegetarian, beautiful place. And I spent my summers there cooking and helping with food. And we made the most amazing food. It was fantastic. And this is great. Moving to Zurich actually has some of the best vegetarian food in the world. So if you can't cook, just go to the Hilton in Zurich. It's the oldest vegetarian restaurant, at least that is been continuously running in the world. 400 seats in this restaurant. 400 seats that are completely full every day of the week, mainly by non-vegetarians, just because the food is bloody amazing. It's fantastic. You don't need to eat meat to get a nice dinner. And food is a nice sense. It's one of my favorite senses. I love to eat. I love to eat nice food, and people want to eat nice food. So to learn how to do that, and a few words which might be a bit more controversial here is what's more important, a vegan or a vegetarian? And I just have a couple of things to say on that. I made a little sketch here on impact on the planet versus our behavior. You know, you can be a redneck human and have a huge impact. Vegans and vegetarians, I put them this way around because the papers that I've read on this topic that have taken the diets of vegans and compared to vegetarians actually show that the vegans have more of an impact on our planet because their avocados and soy milk were shipped across the planet on steamboats or big tankers. But it doesn't matter, they're very close together. What I do know from my experience in the food industry is that vegetarian food is much easier to make really nice vegetarian food. You can make good vegan food, but it's much harder. And it doesn't really matter in terms of the impact on our planet. Well, either one, I think, is important. You're never going to reach the Ahimsa Sajjan or other. You know, there's a few philosophies in the world that really care about all living things, but also they give away all their worldly possessions. And you know, to get down from this level, you just got to throw away everything and live almost in a lifestyle that might not make you very happy, and that's tough. So everyone has a line, and if you want to be perfect, you have to kill yourself, and I'm not going to do that. So everyone has their own philosophy, their own line. Mine is here. I try and do my best. So, coming back to the last topic I want to talk about is, again, out there amongst the stars. Because as I mentioned, there are at least 10 billion worlds out there, rocky planets like our Earth that could host life. I would be shocked if life did not exist out there on other worlds. It would make me very sad if life was only confined to our planet. It might be the case. We don't know yet. But I imagine that intelligent, complex life is reasonably common in our universe. And what is that life going to be like? Are aliens going to be vegans or vegetarians? Well, these are the famous Vogons that read you bad poetry and torture you. But are aliens vegans? Yes, I would guess, if I were to put money on it, if we were visited by an alien species, that a civilization had got their act together to build a starship that could travel between the stars, they're going to be vegans. Why is that? Take our planet. We have the wealth, the technology today to build a starship that we could send out to the stars. We don't do that because 10% of our global GDP is spent on war and its consequences. 10%, $20 trillion per year, whereas space industry receives less than 1% of that funding. There's plenty of money, but we use our money for other things. So, to get to the civilization, the planetary civilization that can get it together to build a starship, tribes have to move beyond that and appreciate the species as a whole. People on a planet, creatures on a planet would have to work together. They would have to appreciate other tribes and other species. They would have to have got it together enough that they were not spending money on warfare. And to get it together to that extent that you can build a starship, I think, will only happen once you get to that stage where a species cares about not just its own species, but the world it's living on. So my hope is that when eventually aliens make it here, they're going to be nice and friendly aliens and not something like the Predator from Alien, which is the most scary alien you ever want to meet. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll stop there.